Television has given us some of the most beloved partnerships in entertainment history. Lucy and Ethel, Fred and Barney, Laverne and Shirley. But few on-screen duos have ever captured the hearts of American audiences quite like Ethel and Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy. Week after week, millions of viewers tuned in to watch them bicker, scheme, and stumble through life alongside Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. They seemed perfectly matched two people who had clearly been married so long they couldn't stand each other, yet couldn't live without each other either. It was comedy gold. But here's the part that most casual fans never knew, at least not while the show was still on the air. The woman behind Ethel Mertz, the enormously talented Vivian Vance, did not have to act very hard when it came to showing irritation toward her on-screen husband, because the man playing Fred Mertz, William Frawley, was someone she genuinely, deeply, and almost viscerally could not stand. This was not a rumor passed around Hollywood gossip columns. This was not a publicity stunt cooked up by the studio to generate buzz. This was a real, raw, and very personal animosity that lasted for the entirety of their time together on the show and, by most accounts, followed both of them to their graves. So what actually happened? How did two experienced professional actors end up developing one of the most notorious behind-the-scenes feuds in the history of American television? And who, if anyone, was really to blame? Today, we are going to answer those questions completely and honestly, going beyond the surface-level gossip to understand the full story of why Vivian Vance truly despised William Frawley. To understand this feud, you first have to understand who Vivian Vance was before she ever set foot on the I Love Lucy set, because she was not simply a lucky actress who stumbled into a great role. She was a deeply trained, fiercely ambitious performer who had spent years earning her place in the entertainment industry through sheer determination. Vivian Vance was born Vivian Roberta Jones in Cherryvale, Kansas. She was the second of 6 children, raised in a household where her dreams of performing were not exactly celebrated. Her mother, in particular, viewed acting as an improper and unstable pursuit for a young woman. But Vivian had the kind of internal drive that does not respond well to discouragement. She participated in school plays from an early age, threw herself into local performances, and eventually made a decision that took real courage. She left home. She relocated to Albuquerque, New Mexico in her early 20s, where she began working seriously in regional theater. She studied, she rehearsed, she performed, and then she made the next leap: New York City. On Broadway, Vivian Vance became a recognized talent. She appeared in productions including Hooray for What?, Music in the Air, and The Voice of the Turtle, among others. Critics noticed her. Directors called her back. She had genuine range, comedic timing sharp enough to cut glass, a strong singing voice, and a stage presence that filled a room without effort. By the time she was approached about I Love Lucy, Vivian Vance had paid her dues many times over. She was a serious actress who happened to be brilliantly funny, and she knew her own worth. That sense of professional self-awareness is important to keep in mind, because it plays directly into everything that followed. William Frawley had a very different kind of story. Born in Burlington, Iowa, into a working-class Irish Catholic family, Frawley came up through vaudeville, the rough-and-tumble world of live variety entertainment that demanded performers be quick, adaptable, and tough. He had all 3 qualities in abundance. Frawley worked his way from small comedy acts to Broadway stages to Hollywood film sets. By the time the rolled around, he had appeared in dozens of films and had become one of those reliable character actors that directors loved to cast. He was not a leading man. He was something arguably more useful. He was the kind of performer who could walk into any scene, growl a few lines in that unmistakable gravelly voice, and immediately make the whole thing feel more real. He appeared in Miracle on 34th Street and alongside Bing Crosby in Going My Way, among many others. But William Frawley also had a serious problem that followed him throughout his career, like a dark cloud: his relationship with alcohol. By the late, his drinking had become so well known in Hollywood circles that several studios had effectively stopped hiring him. His reputation for being unpredictable, difficult, and occasionally absent when it mattered most made producers nervous. He was talented, yes, but was he worth the risk? When I Love Lucy was being cast in, Frawley was in a difficult position. His film career had significantly slowed. He was in his mid-60s, The phone was not ringing the way it once had. So when he heard about the role of Fred Mertz, a grumpy, penny-pinching, lovably cantankerous landlord, he did something almost uncharacteristically humble for a man of his ego. He picked up the phone and called Desi Arnaz directly to ask for the job. Arnaz and Ball were cautious. They had heard the stories. They knew what they were potentially taking on. But Desi Arnaz, to his credit, gave Frawley a chance with one firm, non-negotiable condition. If Frawley missed a single day of work due to drinking, or showed up to the set in any condition other than completely professional, he would be let go immediately. Frawley agreed, and remarkably, he held up his end of the bargain. On the I Love Lucy set, he was punctual, prepared, and professional. He needed this job, and he knew it. PSO, in the beginning, before a single episode had been filmed, there was actually a moment of cautious civility between Vivian Vance and William Frawley. They were professionals. They were adults. There was no particular reason, at the outset, to expect any serious conflict. Then came the casting news, and Frawley's reaction to it. According to Desi Arnaz's own memoir, when William Frawley first learned that Vivian Vance had been cast as Ethel Mertz, his response was immediate and spectacularly unpleasant. Frawley reportedly said, and these are words documented by Arnaz himself, "Where the hell did you dig up this one? She can't sing worth a damn. She bugs me." This was not a private moment of doubt shared between close friends. This was a contemptuous dismissal of a colleague he had barely met, shared openly with the show's producer. Let that settle for a moment. Before Vivian Vance had delivered a single line on the I Love Lucy set, before she had been given any opportunity to demonstrate her talent or her professionalism, William Frawley had already decided he did not like her. His opinion appeared to be based largely on instinct, or more accurately, on the kind of reflexive dismissiveness that can come from a man of a certain generation who did not particularly enjoy working alongside strong, capable women who had opinions of their own. For her part, Vance had her own initial reservations, though they were of a notably different nature. Her concern was not personal contempt. It was professional logic. Frawley was in his mid-60s when production began. Vance was in her early 40s. The show was asking audiences to believe that these two people were a married couple, without so much as acknowledging the more than 20-year age gap between them. Vance reportedly expressed her frustration plainly, saying something to the effect that no one would believe she was married to someone who looked like her grandfather. Was that a cruel thing to say? Perhaps. But it came from a legitimate place, a professional actress thinking critically about whether the casting would be convincing to the audience. It was not a personal attack on Frawley as a human being. It was a concern about the believability of a storyline. Frawley, however, did not receive it that way. He took it as a direct insult and responded with escalating personal hostility that never really stopped. Once the initial sparks were struck, the fire between Vivian Vance and William Frawley burned steadily for the entire 6-year run of I Love Lucy. What began as mutual irritation evolved into something more organized and deliberate on both sides. Frawley was particularly savage in his attacks on Vance's musical abilities. He complained openly that she could not sing, that she had no business offering suggestions during musical numbers, and that her input into choreography was unwanted and overreaching. This was particularly ironic, given that Vivian Vance had spent years performing in Broadway musicals. She had more formal musical theater training than almost anyone else on the set. But Frawley's ego did not have much room for facts that contradicted his preferences. He began referring to her in deeply unflattering terms backstage. One well-documented example involved Frawley suggesting, apparently with a straight face, that the script describe Ethel Mertz's figure as resembling a sack of doorknobs. This was not sharp wit or playful ribbing between colleagues who respected each other. This was a man going out of his way to be cruel about a woman's appearance, professionally and personally. Vance, for her part, did not suffer in silence. She began referring to Frawley as Old Fat Freddy in backstage conversations, and the nickname reportedly made its way into her delivery on certain scenes. She gave as good as she got. Neither one of them was particularly gracious in their handling of the situation. What makes this feud genuinely fascinating, however, is what happened on screen during all of this. Because while Vance and Frawley were trading insults behind the cameras, They were simultaneously delivering some of the most naturally funny and believable couple bickering that television audiences had ever seen. The writers, who were entirely aware of the tension on set, began incorporating sharper exchanges between Fred and Ethel into the scripts, essentially giving both actors a sanctioned channel through which to direct their real frustrations at each other. The result was that their scenes together had a genuinely electric edge to them. The irritation was real. The eye rolls were real. The exasperated sighs were real. And audiences loved every second of it, completely unaware that they were watching two people who genuinely could not stand each other. When I Love Lucy ended its original run-in, the natural question from the studio was, what comes next? The show had been a cultural phenomenon. Its characters were embedded in American living rooms. Fred and Ethel Mertz were household names. So the idea of a spin-off centered on the Mertzes was floated as a very real possibility. William Frawley was enthusiastic. He liked the role. He was comfortable in it. And frankly, he needed the work. For a man of his age whose career options were not exactly expanding by the day, a spin-off built around Fred Mertz would have been an extraordinary opportunity. Vivian Vance said no. Her refusal was immediate, firm, and unambiguous. She wanted nothing to do with a project that would require her to spend more years playing Ethel Mertz opposite William Frawley. Her reasons were layered. She was already deeply frustrated by the typecasting that had come with the role. She worried that the longer she played Ethel, the harder it would become to be seen as anything else in Hollywood. She had genuine ambitions for more serious, dramatic work. And beyond all of that, the idea of voluntarily extending her professional relationship with a man who had spent 6 years insulting and belittling her was simply not something she was willing to do, regardless of the financial incentive. Frawley was furious. According to those close to the situation, he interpreted Vance's refusal not as a career decision, but as a personal attack, one final, devastating slight from a woman he had never liked. He reportedly never forgave her for it, and continued making disparaging public comments about Vivian Vance for years after the show ended. One of the most revealing moments that illustrates just how deeply Frawley's resentment ran came during his later years on My Three Sons, where he played a grandfather figure named Bub O'Casey. Actor Tim Considine, who worked alongside Frawley on that series, shared a story that became something of a legend in Hollywood circles. During a visit from a high-ranking military official, one of the guests made the mistake of asking Frawley what Vivian Vance was really like as a person. Without a moment's hesitation, without any consideration for the formality of the occasion or the company he was in, Frawley responded with a vicious personal insult that shocked everyone in the room. He used language so deliberately cruel that it left the guests visibly uncomfortable. Years had passed since I Love Lucy had ended. The two actors had not worked together in quite some time, and yet Frawley's hatred for Vance was as fresh and immediate as if it had happened yesterday. When Frawley died in collapsing on a Hollywood sidewalk after an evening at the movies, just days after his 79th birthday, Vivian Vance's reported response became equally legendary. She was at a dinner party when the news arrived. According to multiple accounts of the evening, she raised her glass and called for champagne for everyone at the table. Whether every detail of that story is precisely accurate, the spirit of it is entirely consistent with what everyone who knew her understood about her feelings toward Frawley. She made no public tribute. She gave no gracious interviews acknowledging his legacy. She did not pretend, even in the socially expected way that Hollywood often demands, that her grief was anything other than absent. So why did Vivian Vance truly despise William Frawley? When you pull back and look at the full picture, the answer is not actually that complicated. It is just more layered than a simple personality clash. The age gap was the spark, but it was not the fire. What really drove the feud was a fundamental clash of values and respect. Frawley came from an era of entertainment where hierarchy was assumed, where experience meant authority, and where younger performers, particularly younger women, were expected to stay in their lane. When Vivian Vance offered suggestions during musical rehearsals, he did not see a knowledgeable colleague contributing to a collaborative process. He saw someone overstepping, and he resented it immediately and permanently. For Vance, the issue was equally deep. She had spent her whole life fighting to be taken seriously, fighting her mother's disapproval, fighting her way to Broadway, fighting the industry's tendency to reduce complex women to simple supporting roles. And here was a man, right beside her every single day, who made her feel dismissed and undervalued, who made cutting remarks about her appearance, who called her names, who laughed at her expense. For a woman who had sacrificed so much to earn her place in this industry, that kind of treatment was not just irritating. It was a genuine wound. Add to that the very real psychological burden of playing a role that actively worked against how she wanted to be seen: frumpy, older-looking, the sidekick rather than the star, and you begin to understand why Vivian Vance's frustration with everything surrounding Ethel Mertz, including the man who played her husband, ran so incredibly deep. Vivian Vance and William Frawley gave American television one of its most iconic partnerships. Fred and Ethel Mertz are still watched, still quoted, and still loved by generations of fans who discovered I Love Lucy long after both actors had passed. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable. Their timing was impeccable. Their bickering felt lived in and completely authentic. And now you know exactly why. The real story behind that chemistry was not warmth or friendship or mutual respect. It was two fiercely talented and deeply stubborn people channeling genuine, unresolved frustration into performances that resonated with audiences because they were rooted in something real. It is one of the great ironies of television history that the more they despised each other, the better they were together on screen. Vivian Vance passed away after a battle with breast cancer. She never reconciled publicly with the memory of Frawley. She never softened her position. And perhaps, knowing everything we now know about what she endured during those 6 years, it is difficult to blame her for that. She was a brilliant actress who deserved more than she was given. And the man who made her professional life harder than it needed to be never once acknowledged the role he played in that. The feud was real. The pain was real. And now, finally, we know the full story of why. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into classic Hollywood history, and drop a comment below whose side are you on.